Ciao a tutti! Today I'm going to show you some Italian pronunciation mistakes that immediately make Italians realize that you are a tourist when you speak Italian. Now, this is not a problem per se, there's nothing bad in being recognized as a tourist, but this becomes a real problem for many students, and that's why I'm addressing it. Students often get ready for their next visit to Italy by learning words and phrases and practicing small conversations, which is great, bravi, molto bravi. But when they actually use them in Italy, for example, al bar or al ristorante, it often happens that the Italian person immediately switches to English because they realize they are foreigners. And this, of course, creates a lot of frustration in students because they would really like to use the Italian they have been working so hard for. So this is why we're talking about this. But first of all, we need to understand why does this happen? And that's because most students learn the words and memorize the phrases, but they don't give enough attention to how we actually pronounce those words in Italian. And Italian pronunciation works very differently from many other languages. And if you don't learn the typical Italian sounds, your brain will automatically replace them with sounds that are more familiar to you. For example, English sounds, and you might not even realize it. So the word and phrases may be correct, but the sound is still not Italian. Now, instead of just focusing on memorizing tons of words and phrases, it is also extremely helpful to learn the pronunciation patterns behind them. When you pronounce words correctly, Italian people will compliment you and will be less likely to switch to English immediately. So, let me show you two of the most common patterns that you will find in Italian words, with some of the most commonly mispronounced Italian words that contain these patterns. I love to focus on patterns first and words after so you really understand what we're doing and you're not just adding words and words to memorize. I want you to understand why we do things a certain way. So, pattern numero uno, consecutive vowels. In Italian, when I talk about consecutive vowels, I means two or more vowels next to each other. And in Italian, when you see this situation, so consecutive vowels, many vowels next to each other, you need to pay attention because we do something different from English. We don't collapse them into one sound like you do in English, but we pronounce each one of them like if they were self-standing. Let me show you what I mean. This is one of the most mispronounced Italian words, and the reason is this pattern, the fact that students don't understand this pattern. How do you say this? This is not euro. This is euro. Euro. So the key here is to pronounce the e and u like they were self-standing. E, u, ro. And you have your pronunciation. Euro. Don't melt them together. Another example, common example of this pattern is this word. This is cameriere. Cameriere. Can you see that I and E next to each other? Those are terrible for, especially for native English students. Just slow down and take your time to say rie, rie, cameriere. Perfect. And another terrible word with this pattern is this one. This is aereo. Aereo. Can you see the same pattern? Two consecutive vowels. Twice in this word. A-E and E-O. Aereo. Aereo. So again, take your time to articulate each vowel correctly. And this is an especially tricky word because it's so similar to the English one. So you want to say aereo, but it's aereo. So as I always tell my students, give each vowel the attention, the time it deserves. Give each vowel the dignity it deserves. So you will have the perfect pronunciation. Now, pattern numero due, and that's final E. This is another very common mistake with words ending in English E, in Italian la E. So first of all, as we just said, we always pronounce every single vowel, and that's extremely true for ending vowels in Italian. We never ever drop them. I always say, I feel like I always say this in all my videos, almost all my videos, but repeating is a great way to absorbing stuff. So we never drop ending vowels. Why? Because final vowels are packed with information in Italian. For example, they tell you about the gender of the word, the number of the word if it's singular or plural, they can tell you about the conjugation if it's a verb. So we cannot afford to drop those sounds because they are packed with information that you need. So remember, never ever drop a final vowel. Now, when you have an ending E in English, this is extremely tricky because your brain wants to pronounce it as E. Instead, in Italian, the E is E, and it's always pronounced like this, E. Now, let me show you some very common words that have this pattern. The first word is this one. This is grazie, grazie. It's not grazie, it's grazie. Can you see that we're also applying what we just learned with the first pattern, consecutive vowels? We have E, E, and you need to pronounce both of them. Grazie, grazie. Perfetto. Now the next one. I love this word. This is zucchine, zucchine, not zucchini, because the ending E in Italian is always E. And another one is fettuccine, fettuccine, because again, the ending E is E, fettuccine. And I'm really curious, is there any Italian word that you always feel unsure about pronouncing or that gives you a really hard time? Please let me know in the comments. I always love to know about your experience and your struggles with Italian language. Now, going back to these examples, my main point today is to help you noticing the patterns behind the words, not just the words themselves. The good news is that Italian follows very consistent sound patterns. So once you learn those patterns, you will be able to pronounce tons of Italian words correctly and confidently on your own. And by the way, if pronunciation is something that you would like to work on more, then you might find my Italian pronunciation club very helpful. Italian Pronunciation Club is my online program dedicated specifically to helping students master Italian sounds and develop clear, natural pronunciation. Inside the program, I guide students step by step through all Italian sounds and pronunciation rules, and you can practice them along with me. So, if you want to give it a try, you can immediately access some of the lessons for free. The link is in the description below this video. Now, something else that I want to really stress for this lesson. There's one important thing to remember that is often overlooked regarding pronunciation, and that is that good pronunciation also improves your listening skills. When you learn how Italian sounds are actually pronounced, your brain becomes much better at recognizing them when Italian people speak. And that makes real conversations in Italian much, much easier to follow. So that's actually another great reason for practicing your pronunciation skills that impacts directly on your speaking skills. So please remember, sometimes it's not the words that you use that are wrong, but it's the way that you pronounce them that gives you away as a tourist and makes Italians immediately switch to English. So remember, pratica la tua pronuncia. That's all for today. Ci vediamo al prossimo video. See you in the next video. Ciao!